Hi everybody, I'm Dan Joseph, and today I'm joined in studio by Terry Irving, an Emmy award-winning network TV news producer who is the recent author of the book Courier, which is a thriller set around a TV network news bureau in Washington, D.C. He is also someone who has known, now suspended, nightly news anchor Brian Williams for nearly 30 years, and today he's going to talk to us a little bit about the relationship that the two of them had and what he knows about Brian Williams. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
How well did you know Mr. Williams?
We met in different trajectories. I was on my way down. He was on his way up. He was at MSNBC, and we had two very different jobs. I was producing the Don Imus show,
Okay.
and he was producing the nightly primary broadcast at MSNBC, and was irritated that Don Imus would say every morning that he had the highest rated show on MSNBC, which in fact he didn't, but that was Don Imus.
So you knew him well. You guys were friends?
I knew him. He is one of those people. I knew him, and I knew his producers, and I was extremely impressed. I found in television and maybe in life that you meet people that are whip crack smart. So far in my life, I've met about 5.
You said that Brian Williams is one of the sharpest minds you've ever met.
Yeah, there's other people. Ted Koppel was like that, a lawyer that I worked with, a couple other people. Just whatever you're saying, his mind is moving at about 45 miles per hour faster.
And I've heard he's very funny, too, very witty, he'll crack you up. That's what Don Imus always used to say about the guy.
He was. I would, go over there and try to get him to come on. He was too smart to do that.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. Knowing him as well as you did, or based on how well you knew him, do you think that he knowingly lied about what happened in Iraq?
I think it's, there's two ways of looking at it. I think he got it wrong. I also think that everything that goes on television, even this, is not one person. It's not you sitting here. It's not Brian sitting there. It is several hundred people, really. And I used to be one of those several hundred different
producers,
places.
writers, people,
producers,
cameramen.
writers, senior writers, headline writers, field producers, field correspondents. And it passes up and down that chain all the time. And the anchor is lucky. In the good ones, Peter Jennings was as smart. The good anchors are lucky if they can sort of keep their hands around what they're going to say.
Maybe it's the idea of being sort of a movie star kind of character. Maybe you want to be seen in the streets. He was on Letterman all the time. He loved doing these shows.
Yeah.
But my question is, he embellished this Iraq story multiple times. It wasn't just on the network news. It was all over the place.
I went back through that.
What can drive somebody who is that intelligent to do something like that without thinking that, you know what, eventually I'm going to be caught. Eventually I'm going to be busted, and I am going to be embarrassed, and I'm going to have to, my credibility is going to be shot.
Well, the answer to that is nothing, because the fact of the matter is that exactly what you say, that you're going to get caught, you're going to get busted, your credibility will be shot, is what that is what all these guys think about on their way home. I'm telling you, they dread that. They will go and and take sword and flame to their entire staff if something like that happens. I've always been amazed in newspapers. You see the corrections column, and there's 10, 20 things. If there were 10, 20 things wrong in a newscast, everybody would be fired. I'm saying, from the top down, they would be fired if there were 20 mistakes. It is what I had thought when I first heard about it, and I think it's more complex now that I've looked into it, but when I first heard about it is, when you ask what drives somebody to do that story better, to attack that bigger story, to go after that headline job, to finally go for the anchor position. And then what do? You're in the anchor seat. You're already there. You've made it. But you're somebody whose entire nature is to keep going, to keep moving. You're not going to stop. Was that, and it's a it's a Greek tragedy, the sort of classic Sophocles Greek hero. Is it that you rise because of a quality, say it's the desire to tell the right story the right way, and then usually in the third scene you fall, which is Greek tragedy, because of that same, he couldn't stop remaking it.
Well, let me ask you this. As a person who's in the anchor's chair, do the rest of the journalists, the ones who are in the field, the guys who are getting shot at in Afghanistan and Iraq, do they take you seriously as a news person if you're just there, or do they view you more as a celebrity? Here's why I ask. Because if he was embellishing this and embellishing things like Hurricane Katrina and the Brandenburg Gate, well, could it possibly have been to reestablish his credibility as someone who was actually out in the field reporting the news rather than just reading it and giving it to millions of people a night?
The issue with the specific thing in Iraq during the first Gulf War, that is very unclear to me.
Well,
I've looked at it. The pilot says that he had him in there. The pilot says, and then there's a question of. Well, never mind. It's much more complex.
Well, we were talking to some veterans.
I'm not sure that he was attempting to embellish it as much as he was attempting not to contradict something that he had said nice about a guy that he met.
That's what he said, and that was a little confusing to me. But some others, we were talking to some veterans, and they told us, well, listen, if you're in a helicopter and it gets hit by an RPG, you know it. It's not something that you miss. It's not something that
if you're standing, and see, I have a different attitude about all of this. Yes, I've heard bullets go over my head. They make a little zipping sound, kind of a buzz. I've seen rockets go in about 40, 50 feet away. I've had a 50 caliber go over my head. And the next morning, I looked at the thing, and I'm dumb and stupid. I don't know how to do these things. I'm bad at it. I never tell them on air. But my attitude about being under fire is if some moron with a weapon is within earshot of me and not under adult control, which is sort of what I consider most armies like the Iraqi army and Chechen rebels to be, I consider myself under fire. Because I've seen, these guys don't aim. I mean, aiming is generally like this. They hold it up over their head and point it. I remember my first day in Beirut, I watched a RPG go over. Now, I was at the hotel, and you would say maybe I wasn't under fire. But it was directly over my head, and it was just spinning like this, spiraling. The guy had no more idea where it was going to land than, So I have a little bit of a different attitude about it.
Maybe that might be a mistake, but with the pattern, it seems to be the problem here, the pattern of embellishments. And you worked for a lot of different networks. You worked for MSNBC. You worked for
ABC,
CNN, ABC. Now, is this something that other anchors have problems with? Misremembering or embellishing on stories?
I was there the night that Geraldo Rivera did a story that I would have to say was pretty well false from beginning to end. And I knew the people. I mean, I knew and false in very subtle ways that we know how to do.
And he knew it was false.
I don't. You'd have to ask him. But
he won't come in here.
I know it was false because he interviewed a kid who was a very gentle young kid who wanted to go to college in the United States, worked for the moderate wing of Amal, which was the Shiite sort of Rotarians. I mean, they were really, for Lebanon, very moderate. And he edited, I had interviewed that kid 3 weeks before, so I knew him. He'd edited that kid up almost word by word by word in order to create sentences that made him sound radical when, you'd say you hear his voice.
But is that common? I mean, is that a common practice in journalism?
The thing about it is what irritates me with him, the other guy who does it that I really can't stand is, there it goes, the fat guy who did This Must Be Flint or...
Michael Moore.
Michael Moore also cheats.
Okay.
I'm sorry. And it's the things that all producers know. I mean, if you're standing or crouching in front of a burning car and you're talking about the Marines, what are you assuming? Well, you're assuming that you're near the Marines and the burning car isn't somehow related to the Marines. That's what's coming through into your head. No, in that case, in Geraldo's piece, he was 100 miles away in Tripoli, where there was a battle between two rival Palestinian gangs and had nothing to do with the Marines. So, I mean, it's that sort of, and I can't remember the exact choice, but I've read the dissection of what Moore does. He does the same thing. He makes changes for ideological reasons.
Given what happened, can Brian Williams ever regain the trust?
Absolutely.
You think so? You think he's going to be back on the air, and you think people are going to say, you know what, even though he lied, embellished, whatever, we're going to trust him again?
First off, I actually, and I didn't want to go into it because it's too long, but I actually, when you really look at the sequence, I think his embellishments were pretty minor. The other part of it is that when you say that you went in with SEAL Team 6, or DevGru, as we know, and somebody official goes to SEAL Team 6 at their headquarters and says, "Was Brian Williams here?" Guess what they're going to say? They're going to say no, even if he was, because they will not admit to that sort of the sort of actual. What happens in the field is very different than what
right. No, I understand. But since credibility is your currency as an anchor,
right?
Given the way this story has played out, whether true or not, whether embellished or not, hasn't it ruined him?
No.
You don't think so? You think the American people are going to say,
no,
you know what? Even though he has this history,
it's very different from Dan Rather.
We can still to the book, Courier.
Courier.
Tell us a little bit about it. And it takes place obviously in Washington D.C.
It takes place in 1972 in a Washington D.C. that you would never recognize.
No, but it was the Vietnam era. We were approaching Watergate.
It was in the middle of Watergate. This is actually 72. Watergate was the 68, 72 elections. Post 72, Watergate was the investigations. And the technology of the day was film. And to film, like any other film, has to go back and be developed before it can go on the air, even if it's television. So we had 20, 30 motorcycle riders roaring around Washington, being very fast, which I was 21. That's the best thing in the world to do. And delivering the film. I mean, because we had to bring it in. It had to get developed, and then it had to get cut before I went on the air. And the Washington, the motorcycling, the whole ambience of it, that's my life. I was a motorcycle courier in 73.
So, it's based on your own life. And what did these
couriers... plot has nothing to do with
right.
my
So
life
what's the basics?
He's much cooler, much more handsome, and he rides a motorcycle.
What kind of trouble does this guy get into?
He picks up a film, which is an interview with a whistleblower. And I don't get into it in the book, but it's clearly about the White House, about Watergate. And people start dying. All the people, the camera crew, the whistleblower, the film goes missing.
News bureau, people in the bureau start dying, disappearing.
Well, one person anyway, yeah. And the film disappears, and then people are trying to kill him. And it's sort of North by Northwest. He has to figure out what and why. What was interesting was that I was using what I think was a very plausible theory about Nixon's resignation, and I'm not telling you what it is because that's the end of the book.
It's like, where can they get the book? Where can they find it?
You can get Courier anywhere. You can get especially
bookstores,
at
Amazon,
and Barnes and Noble,
and it's available on Kindle.
Of course.
Finally, you told me about this before we started the interview. Tell us a little bit about the next book that you're working on.
The next book is very different. It's called They Are the Dragon King, the book one of The Last American Wizard, and the concept is that there is a terrorist attack on the United States. They capture a plane and they try to crash it into Washington. It ends up crashing into Fort Meade right next to the NSA. And but they're mystics and
they're not terrorists. They're wizards.
Yeah. And so a wave of magic sweeps down across Washington, and there's only one guy left with power, and he happens to be a out-of-work journalist who really doesn't care and doesn't believe in any of it. And he goes through and
they're
works
dragons
out
in the
who's
book.
behind it. Oh yeah, they're
all right. Dragons, dwarves, elves, everything.
Yep. Democrats tend to be elves, a little wishy-washy but nurturing, and Republicans tend to be dwarves. Solid currency, firm, rock-hard values.
All right. Well, listen, the book out now is Courier.
And the other one's next month.
Sounds fascinating. The next one will be out next month. Terry Irving, thank you so much for joining us today. Really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.